Local content is the modern term for what in all economics you would call infant industry protection. Basically, you are protecting your local businesses so that they can grow and develop, and within a good time period, they would not need that level of protection anymore. That is why local content moves in the process of starting off with, let's use the example, 90% foreign, 10% local in terms of the labor and the services that you may have, and then move to a stage where you may eventually have 99% local and 1% foreign within the single company. This is at a micro level I'm talking about. So this is why I'm saying local content and local content benefits and development is the modern term for infant industry protection.
Today we'll be talking all about an issue that is very much in the news right now. It's called local content. I'm sure you've heard all about local content, but many of us probably do not have an in-depth understanding of what local content really means. We know that there was a policy that was drafted under the previous administration, and this current administration is currently revising that policy and having stakeholder meetings. So this local content is expected to be a policy and a document there drafted and implemented to protect the Guyanese people, really, especially because we've seen in other countries where there were big oil finds, the people of those countries did not really benefit from those oil riches. So what the present administration is trying to do right now is having various consultations and meetings to ensure that the local content policy that they would be implementing is protecting the Guyanese people. So while we want to ensure that we have a positive investment climate that will foster that economic transformation, we also want to ensure that the Guyanese people is protected. So joining me on today's program is economist and oil expert Gopnath Bobby Gusai. Bobby Gusai is currently pursuing his PhD at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, United Kingdom, in energy economics. So Bobby and I will be talking all about local content today. Bobby, welcome to the program, and thank you once again for the opportunity and always enlightening our viewers as to all the issues. We talk about oil, the oil sector, the economy, and our emerging market, and Guyana becoming the oil boom of the region.
Thank you, Jennifer, for having me on the program again. And it's always good to have great discussions on the emerging oil and gas economy of Guyana. There are so many different issues that need to be explained and have a better information sharing system as it relates to the oil and gas economy. Today's topic on understanding the local content policy and understanding what local content really means is very important. Every person who are interested in the oil and gas industry, every business that has a focus on the oil and gas industry as a whole, whether it's direct or indirect, would want to make sure that they play a role in the development of the economy and also to gain some benefits from that role that they are playing.
Mm-hmm. So tell us exactly, what is local content?
Local content really means value creation for an economy. So local content is a very important topic in the oil and gas sector of any country, primarily because of the way in which the oil and gas industry is evolving. For most countries like Guyana, we know that they never had an oil and gas industry before. So it is important to understand what the local industry can play in developing and advancing this newfound resource and the wealth that is to be generated. So local content is really focusing on how the local economy, being the people of the country, the local government of the country, as well as the local industries of the country, can be a part of the value chain of the oil and gas industry, and at the same time, how they can benefit from it by growing over time. One of the other key areas of local content is that it is not confined to the oil and gas industry. Local content must be something that is adhered to at a national level for every industry and every sector of an economy. because you want to be able to protect and grow your local private sector or your local business community with the help of international businesses. And that is why international businesses enter an economy, because they want to be part of the local system and they want partnerships. So local content must be seen as a partnership type of arrangement between every sector of the economy and those international operators, service providers that are coming into the country to help advance and improve the economic well-being of the industries.
So how can the people benefit exactly?
Right. So when you're talking about local content for a country like Guyana, you have to talk about it in the human resource capital that we have, and then you talk about the businesses that are in the local economy and how both the human resources and businesses can service the oil and gas industry. So countries like Guyana would want to advance a local content policy that will create local benefits. In many ways, when we talk about a local content policy or local content development, we're really talking about local benefits and the advancement of local benefits from any industry or any resource that is found. In this case, it would be the oil and gas resources, the offshore resources of the Guyanese economy. When you talk about local content, you want to ensure that the local people that would be the skills that are available to service this industry is improving over time. And as the industry grows, so does the magnitude of the skills that can be offered from a local perspective be improved into this economy. Likewise, for the businesses that are operating in the country, you want to be able to ensure that the businesses are contributing significantly over time to the oil and gas economy. Note that I have said over time, because in Guyana's case, we never had an oil and gas industry. We never had a petroleum economy. We came into this process of the oil and gas by being very new to it. And in many ways, it was a steep learning curve for us. For example, we never had a shore base. We never had certain services that needed to service the offshore industry. But we do have certain businesses that can be reintegrated into a new economy. So this is where local content comes in, that the policy will play a role in creating that value creation and that linkages between the old sectors of the economy and the modern sectors of the economy.
So you said a lot of things there. So let's just go one by one. Let's deal with the people of Guyana. Employment, let's tackle that. In the previous policy under the new government, did they have, for example, ExxonMobil should employ a percentage of Guyanese, that this company should have a specific percentage?
This is a new industry to Guyana. We don't have certain specialist workers or we don't have certain oil field workers. We started to train those people from 2015 moving forward. Now we have seen that the percentage of Guyanese who can work offshore, they have been increasing gradually over the last 5 years. So when a company is operating in the oil and gas industry, they more than likely will come into an economy like Guyana and want to bring specialist employees to take care of certain services that the local labor force cannot supply. Guyana has been making good progress in ensuring that people are trained to take on some of these jobs over time. So what the policy, the old policy as I would call it, there's a process in terms of phasing the percentage of foreign workers to local workers over time. But you have to develop this in such a manner that it's not done in a very slow rate, because you want to see from the time you move from 5 years to 10 years to 15 years, when the percentage is starting from 90% of foreign workers and 10% of local workers, that is moving towards 75% foreign, 25% local, and then it moves to 50-50, and then it moves to a case where you have 75% of locals and 25% of foreigners. And in some cases, you move towards the extent that it is 90% of local workers and 10% of foreigners. This, and most companies that are global operators who are coming into Guyana, this is the sort of strategy they have. You will see this kind of a relationship being established in Guyana. So when I say you have to take it in strides, is that you also have to understand what the economy has to offer in terms of the labor supply and what needs to come in to ensure that the industry grows.
So, say for example, on the oil rig, we have doctors and we have medics, we have various health workers and so forth. They're all on the rig, but we have a lot of local doctors. But then we bring, for example, medics from the U.S. But these medics are paid at the salary equivalent to being at the U.S. scale, and the doctors are being paid a salary equivalent to Guyana's scale. So really and truly, while the doctor is obviously more qualified, is getting a lesser salary than the medics, for example. This is just an example. I'm just trying to see what you think. How do you think, do you think that the local content policy will address issues like this? And should it address issues like this?
Of course, I would say yes, it must address certain issues as it relates to wage disparity at every level, whether it is relating to male, female, or different level of workers, or the workers from different location. As long as they're qualified and they are applying for the type of job, they should be paid the equitable salary. Now, the problem with that is because you might have a foreign worker that the company is bringing in to work, and then you have a local who's probably more qualified, and they're providing the same services, but a foreign worker in this case is getting more money, maybe because the foreign worker has more on-the-job training skills, have been experienced at this type of job for longer than the local. But how do you correct that? I think that's where you were getting with that, is that with a local content policy, you can't leave that standalone. You have to have local content legislation, which will protect the rights of workers. So when you talk about local content, you can't talk just about the policy. You have to also talk about the local content legislation. And this is something that the new government of Guyana is also seeking to move forward. That will work hand in hand, will be part of the driving mechanism of ensuring that the objectives and the strategies that are laid out in the policy document, because a policy document is primarily a guidance of how the industry should be growing and how it should be in the direction in which it should be going. But the legislation will ensure that those who are involved in the sector are adhering to the rules and regulation of the country.
So we're going to have a legislation as well.
Yes, there are talks about advancing the legislation, and I think it would be very important to have the legislation, because you can't really have one without the other if you really want to talk effectively about local content and local content benefits and local content development for an industry.
Mm-hmm. So we touch a bit on the workers there. Let's go over to the businesses, the local businesses.
Right. So there are a couple of things as it relates to the business side of local content. In Guyana's case, what we have seen is that there are a lot of foreign companies that came into Guyana, and maybe they register a sub-office in Guyana, or they form a partnership, or they entered into a joint venture agreement with a local company, which is all good. We need to ensure that these companies have a local presence, and a local presence means as a local legal entity present, because you want to ensure that companies that are operating in Guyana are not just taking all of their profits out. They must pay the requisite profits to the Guyana Revenue Authority. And this is one way in which it's been done. And within the policy, the policy that was set out, the old policy, there are some guidelines in ensuring that companies that are coming into Guyana and wanted to work in the oil and gas industry, they must be 51% owned, operated, or capital invested by Guyanese. But, there is
So if I could stick a pin there, 51%. If they're saying 51%, does that mean that company is Guyanese owned, or how does that work?
No, it means that the ownership is probably 51%, which means that if you register a company, if it's 3 persons, maybe two of those persons are Guyanese and 1 is a foreigner. So that's the kind of things that we want to ensure, that a company is local because 51% of its ownership is in country. This would allow for the company to be registered, as a local entity would have to pay the right levels of taxes as a local company, and also make sure that they contribute back into the country. But that is only on the sort of surface side of it. What you want to ensure with your policy and your legislation moving forward is that these companies that are operating are reinvesting back into the economy.
You raised two important points there. So I have two questions. Let's say the company now has the 2 to 1 is 2 foreigners, 1 local. But that company is registered overseas. Where does that company pay their taxes?
They will have to pay in both places. For example, I can tell you in terms of the UK, there's a sort of double taxation treaty that is in place that the companies, of course, they will probably have to pay the taxes in Guyana. Then if they have a branch in the UK, there are certain conditions and maybe certain tax write-off that they may be entitled to, or certain levels of taxes that they will have to pay.
So the second point you raised, you talked about the revenue received. Let's say the company makes 100 million US. Would there be, or is there anything there in the policy, the local content that says so much percentage, as you were talking about, being invested back into the country?
There should be, in terms of a phased approach. For example, if you're operating in Guyana for X amount of years and you're sourcing commodities that are needed for the advancement of the oil and gas industry, then X percentage should come from the local market, which means that you have to find a local supplier, a company that is supplying it from Guyana, not a company that is registered in another country and supplying it to you and then you're using it. So these are some of the things which are laid out in the policy, but the old policy is not the way I initially saw it. It was not very effective because it didn't have the full guidance, because a policy is supposed to have an objective, a overall definitive framework that will show of how these mechanisms will be implemented, and then there should be a sort of a monitoring evaluation mechanism over time to ensure that when things are changing, the industry is changing, the policy should also be updated. It is hoped that the team that is working on local content right now, I'm sure they're looking at all of this primarily as it relates to local supplies.
Mm-hmm. You touched a bit on the previous local content policy, and I read a review by an international technical agency. When they said that that policy actually was, they used the term to say that the Minister of Petroleum, it was left up to him for interpretation for a lot of things as outlined in the policy. So as you were saying, a lot of things were not clear and so forth, not defined and so forth. And we know, here in the US and so forth, they call these types of contracts and policies ones that have loopholes. And we don't really want a contract or a policy to have those loopholes and things being left up to interpretation. We want it to be very clear and definitive to say this is what it outlines, this is what it states. So when contracts like those are drafted and there are these loopholes, you never know what is the right way or what is the wrong way. It's left up to interpretation. So you're not very clear. So we don't want that to happen. So what do you propose going forward? How can we prevent this?
So the old policy, as I said, I'll call it the old policy for now. It is sort of a document that was created that touched on everything on the surface. It didn't really get too in depth into, for example, what should be the objective of a local content policy, how a local content policy should link to other industries, because just as a side note, one thing that a local content policy should do is be linked to the creation of industrial policies for a country, especially for one like Guyana. And these drawbacks or loopholes or side effects are some of the key things that need to be dealt with from a very early stage. The local content policy requirements that it would be laid out in the policy itself will address certain key conditions in terms of how do you advance the human capital within the country and over what time? How do you ensure that there are sources of supplies that will come from the local market and what phase and what percentage over time? How would you allow for the development and reinvestment of profits back into the country? Because you don't want a company that has operated in a particular economy for 10 to 20 years and then all they do is just employ people, they provide goods and services, and then all of their profits are, repatriated elsewhere.
So how do you see this local content evolving?
Right. So the way I see it is that we will need to have a very dynamic local content policy with certain requirements set out. It can't be just one policy alone, one broad policy. It might be a policy that will probably have different attachments, whether those are in the form of appendices as it relates to specific areas. So, for example, if you're looking at shore bases, or you're looking at employment, you're looking at local and foreign employment, you're looking at type of equipment that are coming into the country, certain type of supply vessels that need to be maintained and serviced from Guyana, at what level, how are we going to be growing our industrial base to advance the offshore industry, what type of warehousing facilities and how they can be developed over time. In the oil and gas sector, storage is a big business. So there will be different facets of the policy. The policy itself needs to be very dynamic in the sense that you need to have a mechanism in place that allows for review every 3 to 5 years and input new type of approaches to making sure that the policy is on par with the development of the global industry, and ensuring that the local suppliers or the local industries, while they are benefiting from the objectives and the strategies that are set out in the policy, the foreign operators and the foreign service providers are not at a disadvantage at any point in time, because people are coming into your country, they are bringing in human capital, they are bringing financial resources, they're coming here, this is a business, they're coming here to make a profit, but at the same time, you don't want to lose out on that type of profit that is generated for the local economy. So the policy will need to be like that. The policy will also need to link to other industries, whether that is our shipping industry, whether that is our local manufacturing industry, whether that is our local agricultural industry, or whether it's a local services industry. The policy needs to be linked to other policy guidance documents. It needs to be linked very closely with other objectives and development that are taking place in the economy. And also, the policy must have with it the right legislation to ensure that the policy is bringing out an overall national objective for the country. So those are the areas in which I think the new policy should be focused on, and this is how it will be evolving over time.
Okay, Bobby Gasai, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today to enlighten us more about local content. And it's a topic that I'm sure we'll be discussing, from time to time as things progress, as the formal policy is, formally drafted and being implemented and so forth. We eager to see what are the actual content of that local content policy.
Yes, of course. Thank you again for having me. And I will always say the key concept of local content development, local content benefit, and a local content policy, and the requirements for local content is defining what is meant by local content. The meaning of local content and the meaning of local is very important. They can be foreign companies that eventually become locals. They can be foreigners who eventually become locals. And understanding the importance of local development and local growth and local benefit to an economy is very key to the advancement of a local content policy, as well as the legislation.
All right, Bobby Gasai, thank you so much for coming on the show. I am Jennifer Jabbar. You've been watching Stabrook Boom right here on Guyanese Diaspora News.